Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast version, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found at miamighostchronicles.com. You can also find information about my talk show appearances and any new book projects at marlenepardo.com, or go to Amazon and look up my author profile as Marlene Pardo Pellicer. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and also listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, and of course Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests as we talk about the mysteries of the unexplained. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy theories, and just about anything that is plain weird, you can visit Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. Still kind of crazy. Matter of fact, I was having a conversation with a guest, which I will introduce in a minute, about that in 2020s. Like, we're hoping is like, I think that this year when we have the New Year's Eve, it'll be like, forget welcoming the New Year's. Like, this is it. No more 2020. That this is the end of it. Because right now we're about, almost 3/4 of the way through. And it's like, what? Okay, I hope this is not the intro to the next 10 years, like in decades, because, wow. Yeah, everybody I think is a little bit over it. But anyway, you'll see why. First of all, I've had this guest here, and we're going to talk about some interesting stuff. All right. Which is right in line with so many of the unusual things that are happening this year. And as a matter of fact, help me welcome back Jason Offutt. And but let me give you his bio again for those of you who are not familiar with Jason. He grew up on a farm near the little town of Orrick, Missouri. In his life, he's been a farmhand, a journalist, a photographer, a bartender, and the mayor of the same small town. He now teaches journalism at Northwest Missouri State University and Maryville, and keeps the world safe from the forces of evil. He must be very busy. Okay, so now that the interview bio is out of the way, this is who he really is. He's a nerd, a Dungeons and Dragons playing, Star Trek watching, conspiracy theory fanboy. And he considers The Twilight Zone as the greatest television program ever created. And author Michael Crichton was a wizard. And he once went to I think this is so cute. Went to one Halloween party dressed as Gilligan and his wife as Marianne. As a kid, he looked for Sasquatch footprints in the yard, UFOs over our farmhouse. And one night, his whole family and him saw something that shouldn't or couldn't have been in the sky. And then one afternoon, he, by himself, saw a full-bodied apparition that stared at him through hollow eyes. So, Jason, how are you doing? I love that intro, by the way. Your bio is great. How are
Thanks.
you doing today?
I'm doing terrific, and yourself?
Good, good. Um, so I know since the last time that you were here, you've put out some new books. And we were talking about one of the ones that you just recently put out, which I was fascinated with, is all about the different cryptids, the chasing American monsters, over 250 creatures. And I didn't realize that were that many cryptids. I guess because we always hear about the typical, of course, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, you know, different versions of Bigfoot, by the way, depending on what part of the country you're in. Maybe some dogmen or werewolves, but 250, that's a lot. How did
Yeah, and
you,
there are a lot. You mentioned Bigfoot. Yeah, there are a number of Bigfoot stories because like you said, there are different Bigfoots depending on what part of the country you're on or that you're in. So I included the different ones: the three-toed, the five-toed, the
right,
ones that look like an orangutan. All the weird ones.
right. And from what I understand, there's also some that are considered aggressive or dangerous, and then there's the other ones that everybody thinks is, hey, they just want to stay out of our way and, like return the favor kind of deal. I mean, in other words, different ones in the country have different reputations, I guess.
Well, and why not? I mean, if they're as close to human as people, keep saying they are, there's got to be the same varieties. We've got some really nice, caring people out there, and we've got some real jerks.
Yeah,
So,
yes, we should do.
you know,
Right, yeah,
we,
so
we,
why not?
yeah, humans will mug you in the alley. The mean Bigfoot will rip your head off in the forest. It's same thing.
Right, yeah, well, why not? Why not, Some of us want to play nice with them, and some of them consider us a food source. Let's go to the extreme, right?
Right.
Let me ask you, but still, again, that still leaves room for how did you? I know that you're very good at doing eyewitness interviews. Is that how you brought about all the list of cryptids, or was it just through research? Because I know some of these things, some of these cryptids, they surface for only like a certain time, and then that's it. Then they
Right.
just
Yeah.
disappear.
Then they vanish. Right. And sometimes it's just one. One time. People see them once and then they never see them again, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then sometimes they're seen hundreds of times by hundreds of people. There are some interviews in there. I couldn't have done that for every one of them. I relied a lot
Mm-hmm.
on old newspaper clippings,
Right.
stories written in magazines, things of that nature. But I did talk to quite a few people.
Okay. And because I know that sometimes people, it's surprising. Sometimes people keep these stories for quite a while to themselves because they don't want to be that one, that kooky guy that saw the whatever.
Right.
But
Well, and in my intro that you'd mentioned the full-bodied apparition that I saw, I was about, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, and I saw this in my house. My house had been a two-room schoolhouse. It was about 120 years old when I was a kid, which puts it at about 4 million years old now. But um, yeah, and so it is a pretty old house. And uh, when I saw it, I didn't tell anybody. It was 30 years before I told anybody about it.
right,
And that was my family. I didn't talk to didn't even talk to them about it for 30 years.
right, because people like and I hate to say it, sometimes people think if I heard this from somebody else, I'd be thinking, "What? Yeah, yeah, sure." Like
Yeah.
so they're like, let's just keep this, forget it. It's,
Well, and one of the great things about, I mean, about shows like yours and all the influx of paranormal stuff on TV, it's people are more used to seeing it now, more
right.
used to seeing and hearing people talking about their experiences. So, the last few books that I've written on paranormal topics, people have been a lot more forthcoming, with information than they were my first couple of books.
Sure. Because
Yeah,
yeah,
things have
there's
changed that much in like 15 years.
right the stigma kind of for the people. Some people don't care, but the other ones that do. And I've heard a lot of people also, yeah, like depending also what you did for a living, that thing could follow you around for years.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people were hesitant sometimes to come forward and say stuff unofficially, but even if it had nothing to do with what they did for a living, they just didn't want to run the risk of, hey, I can't afford, especially if, let's say, you did something where your credibility had to be intact. It
Right.
was like, I can't afford to have that be that person because then forever people will be, yeah, that, but remember, he said he saw the whatever, whatever. So,
Well, right, and I interviewed a few police officers, and who didn't who waited until they were till they were
yes.
retired to say anything, because this one man I talked to just put it out there. My partner and I saw this in 1967. It was a UFO encounter. We saw this, and we had to swear to each other that we weren't going to tell anybody about it because as soon as this thing came up, we'd have to undergo psychiatric evaluation, and they didn't want to have to deal with that.
Right. And you know what? And I've heard that. I've heard that a lot of times from law enforcement. They'll say, you know what? And in some cases, depending on what department you work for, it could be a career killer. Officially, they'll never put it. But for some reason, maybe if you have any aspirations for advancement or promotions, they always somehow never seem to go anywhere. And of course they won't say that that's the reason, but sometimes it is unofficially the reason. While it's like, yeah, you know what, let's not, just in case,
Right. Well, I mean, if I were a police officer, an airplane pilot, a doctor, I mean, I wouldn't say a word
Mm-hmm.
for just that reason. That it would, even though I know I would have known what I saw. The things that I
Right.
experienced, I know I saw them. But I was a journalist, and now I teach, so that you know,
Yeah,
it's not as bad as having somebody's life in your hands.
of
So I
course.
understand why they keep quiet.
Yeah, if God forbid you ever do anything wrong, it'll come up. Hey, do you know this guy said that he saw the whatever? All of a sudden, something that's insignificant will
Wait a
become
second,
like,
and he's giving me a vasectomy tonight, or today?
yeah,
No way.
yeah, exactly. No, yeah. Who's on call? Who's the other person available for this? Yes, I can see it. People, and that's what I'm saying. People get wig out, but unfortunately, sometimes they have good reason why they want to keep stuff like that to themselves. Like you said, either because they quit that job or they retire or whatever, and it's like, okay, who cares now? Now I can come out and say anything I want. Yeah, I've heard that a lot. A lot of people that are, by the way, trained observers who have
Right,
quite some good stories about their own firsthand experiences.
right. If I would want to hear what a pilot said. I would want to hear what the police, have seen. I want to
Right.
know this because these are, people. You're right, trained observers.
Mm-hmm.
Just the average person seeing something. I was a journalist for long enough to know how eyewitness testimony is a bit dodgy
Sure.
a lot of times. But and even with trained observers, but I would trust them a lot more than
Right.
than just somebody on the street usually.
Well, if you look at it, sometimes that you say, okay, when you have X amount of reports. Wait, Jason, what I was saying is that a lot of people that have these experiences, they well, sometimes it's surprising when they have a sympathetic ear, as in, let's say, somebody like yourself that asks a story and they know they're not going to get that look like, yeah, sure. They disclose sometimes stuff that they've kept to themselves for 10, 20, 30 years.
Right. Well, and I'll give you an example of another reason that people wouldn't say things. I don't tell this story very often at all, but I'll tell it to you tonight, and then I'll tell you the reason
Yay.
why. I'll tell you why I don't tell it very often.
Okay.
I was working in a newspaper in the Kansas City, Missouri area, and I lived about a 50-minute drive from the newspaper, and we put we put the paper to bed at around midnight on Friday nights, and I was driving home, so it was well after midnight on my way home, and I hit a sign that said my hometown, the town where I was going to, was 5 miles away, and at that sign, as soon as I passed it, my favorite Stones song, "Gimme Shelter," came on the
Okay.
radio, and I thought, this is great. I mean, "Gimme Shelter" is 4 minutes and 37 seconds long. I'll be able to listen to it all the way home.
Okay.
And the next thing I knew after thinking that, the car was dragging. I'd had the road I was on was 55 miles an hour, and I had it on cruise control, and the car was dragging. So, and I looked around, and I thought, wow, road hypnosis. That's weird. So I slowed down. I hit the brakes and slowed down. Fog was everywhere, and I went up the hill. I went up a hill. The thing, I was going up a hill. That's why the car was dragging, and there was no hill in between that sign, that 5 mile sign, and the town where I was going. But I was going up a hill, and I was surrounded by fog. And I went down and up and down and up a couple of more hills before I saw a light shining through the fog, and I pulled in, and
Okay.
it was at that light was a Jehovah's Witness church, and I knew immediately where I was at that point, and I was about 5 miles on the opposite side of the town I was going to. And as I sat there in the parking lot thinking, what the heck just happened to me? I realized the Rolling Stones' "Gimme Shelter" was still on. And it was on for at least another minute.
So all this
So,
did happen within 4 minutes and 37 seconds, but you
yeah,
ended up on another part
I
of the.
I
Wow.
drove 10 miles in less than 4 minutes and 37 seconds because, like I said, I sat in that parking lot for a minute or so and listened to the rest of the song, and I don't know what happened. Now, here's the reason I don't tell that story very often. I think I know what people are going to say to me about it, and I don't want to hear it. Okay, so maybe I think that's why. That's another reason why people don't tell these stories is because they have an idea of what might have happened to them, and they don't want anybody, to try and confirm that.
Well, that's
Does
like
that make
almost,
sense?
yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
let me tell you something, okay? It wasn't really missing time per se, is in some here, you hear some abductees that are gone for hours or maybe days.
Mhm.
Time slip, um, it's almost like distortion, time distortion, but, and it's really funny because you mentioned you saw a sign visually that said 5 miles to where your destination is, and you also had that song that was going to play. So those were two things that you could set basically measure time with, in other words.
Right. And I could measure my speed
Right,
because I had it
exactly.
on cruise control.
So how are you feeling
So
when
there,
that happened?
I was confused
Okay.
as to what happened because, I mean, there was no physical way
Uh-huh.
that I could have driven 10 miles in that amount of time, especially again because I had the cruise control on.
Right.
Yeah.
And but as far as you were concerned, when did you realize something was going on? When you felt going uphill, or when was it that something said, what's going on
Well,
here?"
when I started going uphill, uh, and and there was thick fog. At that moment, I slowed the car down because you know the hill shouldn't have been there, and it had
Okay.
been clear. It had been clear on my way home. I had no idea where that fog came from, but I was
Okay.
just automatically in it. So I had no idea where I was.
Um,
And again, up and down a couple of hills until I saw that light and pulled in and recognized the building.
Let me tell you something. It reminds me of that movie, The Mist, the one that's based on the Stephen King story
Yeah.
or novelette or whatever it was.
Now,
The
there
fog
weren't any
is like what's in the
monsters.
fog.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that I've interviewed enough people and read enough stories that it sounds like an abduction scenario, and I don't
Right.
even I don't want to think about that.
Right. Well, I was thinking because sometimes you hear the abduction where there's more significant loss of time, in other words. Okay, like,
Right. Well, like
it,
Travis Walton, he was gone for
oh,
how long? Five
well,
days or something
yeah,
like
him was
that.
like days, it was like significant. I mean, they were thought that he'd been murdered, and then they were, accusing his coworkers of murdering him.
Right.
But then even then, the ones that are shorter, you hear 1 hour, 2 hours, or that they, it's like a few hours. That's why I said, like, what did you go, like, little mini wormhole in the countryside, like, but kind of, I don't know. That's really a very unusual story. And but you felt okay physically. You felt fine.
Yeah, I felt fine. I mean, I was a little shaken up, but that was emotionally, not physically.
And that thing with the fog coming out of nowhere. Because most of the time, if you look at, I mean, I don't know, but most fog you see it creeping in. You, when it starts to get
Well,
foggy.
right, but it was, I mean, you're driving. If you're driving long distances, you get that road hypnosis, and you're like,
Right. Yes.
where'd the last 10
Yes.
miles go? I don't know.
Yeah. And you
And
just
I chalked it up to that. But the other weirdness in it, it might be something else. Again, I don't want to know.
well, you know what? You wouldn't be the first or the last one that happens to. That's and that thing that you ended up on that hill thing, like, that perfectly well there's no hill.
Right.
Like, okay, did they take you car and all? You see what I'm saying? It's like, what? That's something to ponder there. I mean, how long ago did that happen to you?
Oh gosh, 20 years ago.
Oh, that was a while back.
Yeah.
Did anything ever similar like that ever happen to you again?
No, I've never had anything like that happen. I,
That was
since
quick. That was like, no, no, no.
Yeah, no, that was well, and I never had anything like that happen before.
Right.
Let me throw in one caveat that I remember.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, no, that you said that you were gonna one caveat.
Oh, you didn't hear that part?
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay, yeah, I said one. There's one caveat to my statement about it's never happened before or since is
Okay.
that I don't. It's never happened before or since that I remember.
Ah,
So it might have, and I just don't remember, which is fine by me.
well. Let me tell you something. I mean, I did hypnotherapy for a few years, and I had people coming. Believe it or not, I actually had people that were coming to me like, "Can you make me forget this?" And it'd be like, "No, I can't do that. I can usually help you the other way around, depending on what it is, you know." But there was some people that wanted me to hypnotize them to forget certain things. But usually, in my experience, when you don't remember something or your mind doesn't remember something, it's because your subconscious mind doesn't think that you can handle it. And
Yeah,
some people, you know how some people get these recovered memories, like maybe sometimes years later. It's because maybe then you're ready. And some people never remember ever, and it's your subconscious mind telling you, you know what, we want to keep you sane, so we're gonna bury this forever and ever. But of course, that's just me going down like a rabbit hole as to if you've ever had any experiences. One time, I went to a meeting that we had here with people for ufologists, and UFO would come and do presentations. After the meeting, people drift off and they start talking. I had more than one person tell me, "Hey, I had a sighting. It was either UFO sighting, or even in some cases extraterrestrial stuff, weird stuff." And they said, and all of a sudden I started having paranormal stuff happening in my home, and it was like, really. And more than one person told me the same thing. It was like they dovetailed, like paranormal stuff, as in things that you think of like have nothing to do with what the extraterrestrial slash UFO field.
right.
And
I've interviewed people who've told me the same thing
really,
that they've had an encounter with something otherworldly, whether it be
mm-hmm.
that they've seen a UFO or encountered a being that they thought was an extraterrestrial, and then after that it was like the gates had been opened,
Right,
and
exactly.
yeah,
Yes, exactly. And that's they themselves couldn't understand the connection. Like, what does it have to do with either me sighting a UFO, or in some cases, some of them said that they saw, let's say, an extraterrestrial looking in through the window of the room. This is a for instance. I had more than one person tell, and then they're saying, and then all of a sudden, weird things started going on in my house, as in poltergeist, kind of like weird. Like, what does that have to do with the extraterrestrial thing? And it seems in some cases like they overlap. And I'm sure, if I don't know if you ran across this when you were doing your research on cryptids, where there's sometimes they find a pattern of cryptid sightings also coincide with UFO sightings. Uh,
well, yeah, well, especially Bigfoot comes up a lot with
mm-hmm.
that. If there's any and this is something that a lot of Bigfoot people don't like to hear, and a lot of UFO people don't like to. They don't like their worlds to intertwine. But
Right.
there have been so many Bigfoot sightings at the same place that there have been UFO sightings, and at the same time. I mean, it'd be hard to ignore all those.
Right. And I
Now,
know that of course the correlation is like, are they connected somehow? Is the thing.
right, and who just like with all this stuff, really, who knows?
Well, who was it the other day that was telling me that yeah, that Skinwalker Ranch, the one in Utah that's gotten
Right.
all those years, that there was, I believe, that there was one story. I can't remember who the source was. I think it was one of the people that was on there, either that or one of the family that was living there originally. But
Right.
anyway, that there was a story where they saw what looked like a UFO and an actual looked like some type of cryptid animal being discharged from like a tube or something from the this UFO kind of thing. And I was like, I hadn't heard that. I mean, I had heard all the different stories of the Skinwalker. I had not heard that one in particular. And God knows they've seen a lot of weird stuff out there. Either UFO and or cryptid and or question mark. That and then of course you hear because you have the people that think okay, Bigfoot or Sasquatch is like a nature thing. Like they're okay. They're just some type of primate, whatever you want to call it, that we haven't identified. And then you have the other people that think, are they coming in through rips or tears from another dimension, and that's why they're connected to UFOs? And then it just takes on a whole different context. Or do we have both? Do we have natural ones, and then maybe the ones that escaped and came and stayed here, and then the other ones that come and go. Yeah, I know what you mean as far as some people don't want those two things to overlap.
Right. I'm well, and on this, I'm open to about anything because basically we really don't know.
Yeah.
And people who say that they know, they don't know.
Yeah.
But the way I view Bigfoot, and it's kind of the same when it comes to UFOs. In the most logical explanation for Bigfoot is that it's an unidentified primate. Okay. That is the most terrestrial, logical explanation.
Right.
I'm open to a ton of others. I've talked to people who are convinced it's an interdimensional being or a nature spirit. Okay, that's fine, and you could be right, but let's prove that it's not not a flesh and blood creature, not a primate from this planet before you start jumping to interdimensional.
Right.
Let's take this off the board first, and then we'll take a step in your direction. And it's the same with UFOs. I mean, the thing to do now is to say that they're not nuts and bolts craft coming here from Alpha Centauri or wherever, or Zeta Reticuli.
Yeah.
But looking at it, to me, that's the most logical explanation. And when people say it's too far from there to here, well, it's too far for us. It's
of course, exactly. With
right.
what we know of whatever propulsion or getting around, of course, sure.
Right. It might not be too far for them. So whatever your theories about UFOs, being their interdimensional craft or whatever, let's disprove the nuts and bolts one first. And then you might be right. I don't know. I just want to, take this one out of the equation before we move on to something else.
Sure.
Anyway, that's just the way I think.
People don't realize that, and let's go with the United States. There's a lot. People sometimes think, oh, well, wouldn't we have come across, a Bigfoot, dead or alive, as in a real specimen and people don't realize there's a good portion of the United States that's uninhabited. In other words, you might have a road going through it.
Oh my gosh! And I'll talk to people, and they're like, "No, because we've been everywhere." No, there are huge swaths of forest that people don't ever set foot in.
Exactly.
There are tons of places for cryptids to hide in this country.
Yeah, the best you might have is a road going through it, a 2-lane, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If that, it might just be a dirt road in a national park that gets driven on once every 10 years.
Yes. Yeah. People don't realize there's huge amount of land in the United States alone that is uninhabited, and maybe I'll have a few people come through, and even then they're just coming and going, but there's nobody really living out there.
Right. And look at Canada. That's most of the population of Canada is close to the American border, so that leaves a lot of room. Yes. Asia, Africa, South America. My gosh, yes. Australia. There's so much empty space.
Yes,
these cryptids could be hiding in.
Yeah, we always think of like that everything is what we've got around us, and it's like no, You know, humans usually, like you said, are living on around their cities, you know, but there's
Mhm.
a huge amount of land that these things could very easily exist in and avoid human contact altogether if they wanted to.
Right. Well, and there are also lots of been lots of reports of Bigfoot around large cities, but it's generally uh, close to a major river, and you know, no, we don't have things down close to a major river usually
Mm-hmm.
in big cities, so they could still still travel quite a bit through a highly populated area and never be seen.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And let me ask you, of all the 250 cryptids, did you ever come across something that you were going, what is this? What in the world is this?
Oh yeah, well yeah, there have been a few of those. A couple of them. I mean, I even included a couple that were, most definitely, um, misidentification, or just one especially is silly oh from Pennsylvania. It's the squonk,
The squonk?
and it's like a cross between a Shar Pei and a pig.
Okay.
And the thing, it hangs out in the forest and makes a noise like it's crying.
Oh my
And
God.
there was one guy back in the 1800s who claimed that he captured one, and he had it in a big sack over his back. And by the time he got home, the sack was drenched with water, and the squonk was gone. It apparently cried itself out of the
Oh,
bag.
that's way okay. All right. But some okay, why not? Why
Yeah,
not?
and there are some other ones like the slide rock bolter from Colorado. That was a legend back when people were mining for silver and gold up in the
Hmm.
Rockies, and it was supposedly looked like a whale that lived on land, and it had a huge hook on its tail instead of a fluke. It was a hook, and the hook would hold on to a mountain ridge, and whenever it saw people down below, it would release the hook, slide down, and eat them.
What?
I think that was a story that was made up by the miners to keep people from poking around and maybe laying claim to their land.
Yeah, that you would think that would probably work. Most people like be like, huh?
Yeah,
You know, or is that how they explain the avalanches? I don't know.
well, maybe. Hell, yeah, but some of these that actually have some history to them are um, pretty fun as well. In Alaska, southeastern Alaska, there's a creature that I'm not going to be able to pronounce. Is Kushdaka.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know it's like something is like a really weird sounding name, something like
yeah,
that.
it translates into the land otter people, and they're
Okay.
basically were otters. And these were otters, if they see someone, a human, they don't really like humans all that well. And if they see a human alone on by the shores of this lake, they will appear as a beautiful human of the opposite sex and lure them into the water to drown them. And
Wow.
there's two things they're afraid of. One is dogs. So the
Okay.
local the local Inuit tribes kept dogs to protect them from the
Okay.
were otters. They're also afraid to be peed on. Yeah,
Okay. I
and
think
I
I'll
think
go. I'll go
yeah,
with the dog thing if I want to get rid of
yeah,
it.
I think the best thing with the were otters is in 2013, actor Charlie Sheen uh, went to Alaska with some friends to search for the land otter people, and they didn't find any.
Uh huh.
Mm.
Okay. That
So if Charlie
I
Sheen's on
I was gonna
this,
say yes. Like why not? I
yeah,
mean that you know if you think about it, that makes sense that he would be looking for something like that. I
yeah,
mean, you know, like that's something unusual. Like, nothing better to do. What could we think of? Well, hey, Alaska, the otter people, or where otter. But let me ask you, the origins of that, though, are they from the native tribes originally, right? In other words?
Right, right.
Okay. Okay.
And I have quite a number of stories in the book. It is called Chasing American Monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a few stories that are based on Native American and First Nations peoples legends.
Right. And I mean, for the I've got one of my slides is showing the covers of your recent books, including that one that you're talking about. Um, and I think that some people don't realize that not all, but some of these cryptids, their origins started even with the people that lived, let's say, in that particular area, the Native Americans, whatever whatever territory that was, that they were already talking about seeing this creature long before anybody else arrived.
Right, right, and a number of lake monsters throughout North America are like that. That were talked about by the natives, as well as lots of Bigfoot encounters. One of the things, uh, if I can talk about the big hairy guy again for a
Sure.
second, um, one of the things that tends to come up when the Native Americans discuss Bigfoot is that were just another tribe of people. They were big and hairy, but they were
Right.
another tribe of people. And this is one of the things. Like I said before, I want to. I'd like for somebody to prove that Bigfoot isn't a living primate. And according to the Native Americans, that yes, he is. I mean, we're primates as
Mm-hmm.
well. Um, but they were human, and they traded with them. Um,
Okay.
and the Bigfoot would sometimes steal women as mates.
Okay.
So and of the different types of Bigfoot we've talked about, there are a lot of them that people report their facial features look human.
Right.
There have been a number of hunters who've said that I had this in my sight, but I couldn't pull the trigger because it looked too human.
Right.
Right,
Exactly.
and um, now I'm going to take that to a different step. Um, Dr. Melba Ketchum, are you familiar with her?
Yes.
Yes. Well, the DNA that she had analyzed that was purported to be Bigfoot DNA came back as human, but with some anomalies. There was another Bigfoot hunter in Alberta, Canada, who had DNA that from a Bigfoot, and it came back as human with some anomalies. There was a British researcher. He was a college professor and anthropologist who had Zana. I don't know if that name's familiar. She was allegedly an Alma, which is the Russian Bigfoot that
Mm-hmm.
was captured by a far off village, and the men of the village were able to mate with her, and she had offspring. Well, he was able to get one of the offspring um, exhumed, and he did DNA testing on it, and that came back as human, but with some anomalies. Well, what if all three of these tests that were done were right, and the samples were actually from a Bigfoot, and they're just humans, and those anomalies are the things that they couldn't figure out what they were. That's just
Right.
what makes them a Bigfoot. They're
Right.
very well could be a great part of this great big human family.
Right. Or I'm sure you've heard stories of what they call feral children, who
Right.
you know things like that, where maybe they're not feral as in maybe they were the offspring of a Bigfoot. In other words, you know. So because especially before, you would sometimes hear about these children being found, and of course people would say they were brought up by animals, nothing having to do with Bigfoot, but it makes you wonder really what their origins were. Maybe they weren't abandoned children per se. You
Yeah,
know,
I hadn't thought about it that way.
so yeah, it's like it makes you think, yeah, they're or especially if you start thinking, okay, What if one of these Bigfoot is actually having a child with a human? When I say a human woman, as in a non-Bigfoot, are you going to
Right.
have an offspring that looks more human than a regular Bigfoot? But obviously not totally human. Or like genetics, genetics is weird. You'll have one offspring that looks one way and then another one that looks another way.
Right.
It's
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Like I said, I hadn't really thought of it that way.
and let me. And did you run across any and when you research? I'm sure you've heard about all these weird disappearances in the parks and all these places of people like
Right.
basically
I
being
followed
plucked.
the 411 the
Right,
missing
right. The
411
Can-Am
stuff.
missing 411.
Yeah.
Do you think that cryptids? And I'm not gonna point the finger only at Bigfoot, but he's up. He's right up at the front of the line. Do you think that they have anything to do with those disappearances?
That's whenever I first heard David Paulides talk.
Mm-hmm.
That is the first thing I thought. That is
Right.
the first, and he's the work he's done has just been terrific.
Oh, there's a lot of crunching of information there. I'll tell you that much.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So yeah, all researchers out there should thank David for all the work he's done.
Mm-hmm.
But when I first heard him, I'm like, that's got to be it.
Yes.
But there have been so many strange ones, and I've heard stories and talked to people who've had missing, who've been missing and known people who've been missing that
Mm-hmm.
don't really correspond to that. That all the missing, I think it's really a combination of a bunch of different things. Could some of them be? Yes. I'll give you an example of one. There was,
Mm-hmm.
I think this was like 2 years ago in North Carolina. It was like it got down below like 25 degrees or something at night, and there was a two or 3 year old boy missing. He went missing out of the backyard, and their backyard butted up against the forest, and he was gone for 3 days. And like I said, it got down to about 25 degrees at night. Well, a little kid like that's going to die out in the
Yes.
wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
And they found him, and this is just like Paulides says, they found him in a spot that they had been searched a number of times before, and then they found the boy there. And the boy said that a bear kept him warm.
Right.
Do you remember that story?
I've heard of that story. Yes.
You,
And of course, when you have small children, it's very difficult sometimes when you're trying to get information out of them because their description is their interpretation of what it is.
right, big and hairy. It's going to be a
Right.
bear.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
in the winter,
No.
no, a bear is going to eat the child.
A
That
child.
child was not kept warm by a bear.
Oh yeah. Or he would have died of exposure. That's. I mean,
Yeah. So what kept that kid alive?
good question, huh?
That's the question. Yeah.
But then, because I when you start going down, let's go down that rabbit hole, and then you say, because that a lot of his research is he always tries to find a common denominator for all these people that are being taken. Like trying to see is there something that links all these people, even though there might be hundreds of miles. And then I'm thinking, okay, if we say for it's a Bigfoot or a cryptid, how does Bigfoot or cryptid know that particular thing about this person's background? For example, and I know he's mentioned that, especially with children, that sometimes they have, they might be, they might have some type of learning disability or something like that. That you would think, because you think of most predators as being opportunistic. Oh, they take
Right.
whoever they can, however they can. And you would think, okay, if this would be a cryptid that wants to abduct a child for whatever reason, how would they know? Well, we're going to take only these certain ones that have this in common versus the one that's just the easiest. Because, like he said, like they say, don't be the last one in line.
Right.
Which is like, you better believe I'm not going to be the last in line. Not especially if I go to the park. But
Well, I mean that's where predators, will pick off on herd animals. They
yeah,
pick off the
exactly.
last ones.
that part makes sense. That part makes sense where, if this is the last one, and I can dart and get this one real quick, yeah. But there's other parts that it's like, why would they pick that one in particular? Sometimes that's not the most opportunistic one, as far as that. So yeah, I let me tell you something. You could go round and round on that, and again, considering the amount that he's found throughout the years that have been reported, because I know some of the stuff has been years and years and years. It makes you wonder, because I heard the theory, people living in the woods, like you name it. And it's like there's just too many people that go missing under very unusual circumstances. Some are found, some are not alive. Others, again, when he details, the ones that are found just in areas that have already been searched. And it makes you think, okay, it's almost like even if, let's say, a person or a cryptid would decide to kidnap this child and return him, like, this changed my mind. Why would they put him back there? It's kind of like there's something there that's so weird and so unusual. But yeah, I that's the only part that I see, or where they find the child like up a mountainside or somewhere. Like, yeah, how'd that kid get up there without shoes or something like that?
Right, right. Well, and there are cases to where a child will be missing, and then a few days later he's back where they'd searched before, and this kid was wearing somebody else's clothes,
Right.
or he was wearing his clothes on backward, and the kid was young enough to where he couldn't physically take his clothes off and put them back on.
Right.
And that kind of falls in line with some alien abduction stories too.
Yes, and anybody who's had children knows exactly what he's talking about. At which age a child can actually put their clothing on.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
it's an acquired skill. It's
Yeah. And when they're young enough, it's like trying to put clothes on a mongoose. I mean,
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, that people don't realize. No, you may know how to put your clothing on now, but there was a time where you didn't, or you thought you were doing a great job and not really.
Yeah.
It's just like that. And now you I know you did when we spoke originally. You had come out with a Shadow Man book, which I thought was super interesting. Okay, because you come to realize a lot of people have had that type of encounter, as far as, and then you came out with what lurks beyond, and then you have also two fiction books, which, by the way, I read a little bit and they're great. That one about you had to build a time machine, and the other one about it's a bad day for an apocalypse. Oh my God, that is such great writing, Jason.
Thank you.
Man, God bless your imagination. But anyway, let me ask you something. And what lurks beyond is that? What is that one about?
That was, well, I wrote a newspaper column called From the Shadows for about 4.5 years, and
Okay.
it was paranormal based. Every story was on either me digging into a spooky topic, or telling somebody's story who'd had some encounter.
Okay.
And I noticed that I was contacted by a lot of people who lived around me. So I thought, let's do an experiment. So I got a map. I measured out on a piece of string 100 miles. I thumbtacked one end of the string in the town where I live. I had a pencil on the other end of the string. So it was 100 miles on the string, and I just drew a circle. And I looked for every single paranormal thing I could find within that circle. And I found, of course, the hauntings. Found a couple of famous UFO encounters. A guy who tried to build a time machine claims he actually did. Demonic possession, some shadow people, and a mind-reading dog. I found all of this stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
Son of Sam
So yeah,
found you.
my basic point with the book, and I say this in the introduction, is or no, the afterward. Sorry, it is. I found all this stuff around it within 100 miles of my house, and if it's within 100 miles of mine, it's within 100 miles of yours. So go get out there and look for it.
Right. In other words, you don't have to travel to some exotic place or across the country where everybody else goes. By the way, for
Yeah,
that for that paranormal experience.
just walk out your back door.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. People. I. You know what? I agree with you 100% on that. It's just that some places, for some reason, they get the notoriety because they get more exposure. So people like legend trippers and people like that say, well, if I want to have the genuine experience, I need to go out to the bridge where the goat man is seen, for example. And sometimes if you just look around, you might have goat man, if that's what you're looking for, closer than you think.
Yeah,
Or,
yep,
or,
you sure
or,
will.
or some version thereof.
Yeah,
Because, for example, Bigfoot, we've got what they call a skunk ape down here in Florida, just west of where I live at, which is the Everglades. As a matter of fact, they have an outpost there, like down one of the roads that runs east to west. Oh, right through the Everglades, in other words, and it's a Bigfoot headquarters outpost kind of deal. And but if you speak to the tribes that are out here are the Miccosukee and the Seminoles, and just like what
Hey,
you were
Dad.
talking about, they have stories of if you want to call it skunk ape being around way for many many years prior to anybody calling it the skunk ape. In other words,
right.
uh,
And that's one of the things that really annoys me is that people immediately discount the local legends.
right,
And it's ridiculous. I mean, these stories came from somewhere. And if we have all of these Native Americans talking about Bigfoot, we have the Aborigines in Australia talking about Yowie. Um,
mm-hmm,
you know, listen. And one of my favorite examples of this is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
okay,
For years, the locals there were telling stories of an extremely large chimpanzee who spent most of his time walking on his hind legs, would howl at the moon, and was able to kill leopards and lions and eat them. And the Westerners came in. Oh, we know more than the locals here. There's no such thing. Well, in 1996, the Billy, because it's the Billy Forest, the Billy Ape was discovered by Western science,
there you go,
and it was exactly as the locals said.
right.
It, yeah, and wow, if you would have just listened and maybe had somebody take you out there, it would have been before 1996 that we would have known this species of chimpanzee exists. Why aren't more legends and stories like this taken seriously? There's so much we could actually know if we just listen.
Well, I think that when you have whatever people are living on that land, that it's like they're not going anywhere. They don't want to go. Plus, either they don't want or they can't. So they have a choice. They either get along with whatever it is, or just coexist with it. They see it as part of I lived in this place, so I'm just going to adapt to my environment, including the whatever it happens to be. If it's friendly, great. If it's not, well, we'll just don't ever go alone into that part of the whatever, because the you know what will get you. I mean, people didn't think about, and they just took it. I guess my point is they took it as the norm, as the natural world, not
Right.
for us. Because if you look at it from the beginning, once you identify it as a cryptid, it's identified as something that probably, in other words, mysterious and can't exist, or not normal. In other words, once
Right.
you
Well, and there are so many examples of that throughout history, like the mountain gorilla and the giant panda.
right,
I mean, Western science, didn't think those things. They thought they were fanciful stories until they actually saw them. And well, the platypus. Even when a scientist brought one back from Australia, the people in England, thought it was a hoax,
Well,
even
and
when they had a body right there.
right, and this is the thing when you think of, of course these are animals are found in Australia with the way that they reproduce, which in other words um, they don't hatch per se, and they don't give what they, like most mammals, uh, they basically, have a pouch, and it's most that and that's only known there. That's where you see it with kangaroos and all these animals that are in Australia. Why can't that? And that's just the norm. That's just the way animals develop there as far as reproduction.
Right.
And I think that what was it? I was hearing that they had discovered in the ocean, where the Mariana Trench is, that they found like a deeper something beneath, like deeper than the Mariana Trench, and that
Wow. Yeah.
they were trying to guesstimate what kind of animals would live there or be able to exist there. Um, in that something as deep as that. And again, you don't think that you know, that there's things there that maybe we've never seen, or perhaps maybe some come ashore if they're ever washed up. I mean, yeah. And then
Yeah.
of course, there's more oceans than land, so that leaves a lot of exploring to be done.
Well, in our ocean, the bottoms of the oceans have been mapped by satellite. About 95% of the ocean floor has been mapped by satellite. However, 95% of the ocean floor hasn't been explored by people. We have
Right.
no clue what's down there. Um,
Exactly.
there was and there are a lot of creatures that just don't go around shipping lanes because the boats make too much noise.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading Kon-Tiki by Thor Heyerdahl. He was a Norwegian anthropologist who wanted to prove that the Polynesian islands had been settled by people from Peru.
Yes, I
And
heard that.
right, yeah, and he and some other Norwegian scientists built a raft that the ancient Peruvians would have used and sailed it all the way out to Polynesia, for like 4 or 5 thousand miles.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the parts of the book just floored me because he was writing that at night he was sitting looking at the ocean, and there were lights that were under the water, just under the water, under the boat, and they would follow them.
Wow.
What the hell was that?
Exactly. That was gonna fall. It's like, and they weren't looking at that point. It's not like somebody's, oh, I'm looking. I'm looking to have my UFO encounter while I sail across the. No, that's not what they were there for. But he observed it. In other words.
Right, right, and there are self-luminescent animals
Mm-hmm.
that live underneath the. I mean, they live way down deep. They
Yes.
can't come up that because of the water, the pressure. They
Yeah.
cannot come up that high. So
Yeah.
what was making those lights? It's just crazy to think of all the things we don't know about the ocean.
I think that, and who for all those people that think that the age of exploration has come and gone, I beg to differ.
Oh no, we've got lots of discoveries yet to make, and we science discovers approximately 18,000 new species every year.
Yes.
Now, admittedly, like 10,000 of them are insects,
Mm-hmm.
but they also, I mean, a few years ago they discovered a new species of orangutan. That's a nice size animal.
Yes.
Again, in 1996, the Billy Ape. In 1977, the megamouth shark, which is
Right.
what I think 18 feet long,
Yes.
it was rediscovered. So there are a lot of discoveries. I agree with you.
Right.
The age of discovery is not over.
Right. And that mega mouth shark, it's scary to look at. It's kind of harmless from what I understand. All of what is it that eats plankton or small fish? But when you
Right,
look
right,
at it,
yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
yeah. But you know what? If you were back in the times when people were maybe the 1900s, 1800s, you saw something like that in the ocean, you'd be like, huh? Oh my God, the monster. Like,
it's a sea monster. It's
Yes, of
absolutely what it
course.
is.
Of course, when you saw something like that, you weren't there to gonna find out what does it eat. You're gonna assume it wants to eat you. Yeah, and people don't realize all animals are opportunistic. I tell everybody one time I took, even predators. When they say all these people that they would see these sightings of all these different, like what you said that they could have said was sea monsters. I remember one time I went out on one of these gambling ships off the coast here, and they go out X amount of miles where it's legal to. Well, not this was before they legalized a lot of the gambling here in Florida, but even then, there's this smaller, nice little cruise ship, and it'll take you out X amount of miles off the coast, and so that you could legally be gambling. And I remember we went out, and after a while we said, "Oh, let's go up on the deck. Let's go get some fresh air." And just it was nighttime, and when they drop anchor, these ships have these lights that basically run around the deck underneath. Excuse me, and they light up the water. Obviously so that nobody runs into the ship. So we go and we look, and we looked over the side, and the whole ship, the entire ship was surrounded by huge sharks. Okay. we were, and basically these animals know that I guess they drop off food, they let go of stuff out there. So they're there to basically eat. I'm not talking about a couple of sharks. Because
A bunch. Oh my gosh, that's just like the fish at a feeding pond.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it looked like. And they were right there. They were right on the top of the water because these floodlights that they were along the sides of the ship all around. They basically illuminated the water right on the top, right where the ship was sitting on, and they were right there at the top. They were you could easily see them, and out there the water is translucent. All right. There was no mistaking. Oh, is that no? There was like not one. We walked around the entire deck, and they were all around. And I know the only reason why they're there is like they had nothing better to do, is because they knew that hey, when this thing comes out here, we get food. We can eat stuff. But when you looked at that, it was like, oh crap. It's like whatever you do, don't fall overboard.
Right. I hope this thing doesn't sink. Yeah.
Oh no, let me tell you something. That was that's enough to like, yeah, let's go back in, let's go have another drink quick. Yeah, but that was but I'm saying as far as, even back then, which by the way, when you think about people going on these ships like these sailboats and like, that you would think, well, yes, a lot of these predators and these animals sometimes would follow these ships around hoping to get fed, or if it was an older animal or an infirm or sick one which was hungry, they do. That's why I think a lot of these sailors sometimes had these sightings of the so-called sea monsters. Because you would think, what, these sea monsters have nothing better to do than pick on the poor, sailing vessel, and it was no, maybe they were just following it for,
It's an easy
survival.
lunch.
Eating. People don't realize the bigger you are, the more food you need to subsist on a daily basis. So, which by the way, getting back real quick to that idea about Bigfoot, using humans or anything else that they could to eat. I said, if you think about how big a Bigfoot is, you always think of Bigfoot 7, 8, 9 feet tall, weigh hundreds of pounds. I say, do you really think these animals are going to subsist just on berries? You know how much of their day they have to eat to
Right.
maintain having a body weight? They got to eat a lot, and probably meat. I hate to say it, like berries and leaves. No. So I sometimes think that people want to overlook the obvious of what it is that we get used to. We're hungry. All we go is into the room and get a snack from the refrigerator. And when you live out in the wilderness, any animal, your good portion of your day is spent on survival, as in eating. So,
Right. And yeah, if this thing was 8 foot tall and 700 pounds, that would he'd spend a lot of the day eating.
well, I say go to any zoo and ask the people that take care of the predators, like the lions, and ask them how much food and do you need to feed it on a daily basis. So for this animal just to maintain their weight, to be okay.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. A lot of times, maybe they don't want to, but it's like opportunity raises itself. It's like, man, I could eat that human, and that'll take care of my food for the day. Or I have young, and I know there's people out there that don't want to think of Bigfoot as doing something like that, but why not? I mean, I think it could happen under certain circumstances.
All sorts of primates eat meat.
Yeah, yeah,
All of them do.
yeah. I think what was it, Jane Goodall, when she did that observation of the chimpanzee? They discovered a lot of stuff about primates that it's not like Cheetah in the Tarzan movie. In other words,
Right.
anyway,
Right. Well, yeah, they will. Chimpanzees will hold war on another another troop of chimpanzees that is in their territory, and they will eat
yes,
the ones they kill.
yeah, yeah. People don't realize that they want to make how want I get they and I don't mean this because people are like, oh, you're trying to demonize the animal. No, I'm not saying, but don't humanize them either. As in that they have sometimes, because I don't see sometimes. I guess like, and I point out to people, I say, when you see the lion go and kill the gazelle or the baby deer or whatever, it's not a good and evil thing. This is just an animal doing what it needs to do to survive.
Right.
you know we feel bad, man. I feel bad if I kill a roach sometimes. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you know most of nature doesn't see it through the eyes of the human being, in other words. that's
Right.
So yeah, yeah, be careful. For all those people that go out in the woods knocking on the pieces of the tree, with a thing hoping that Bigfoot shows up, you better think about that.
You know what? I don't think Bigfoot tree knocks at all. I think the people who hear tree knocks and they give tree knocks back are just tree knocking to other Bigfoot hunters on the other side of the forest. They're
I
just
know.
all out there talking to themselves.
Right. Who was it one time? God, I can't remember now. It was somebody else that we were talking about the Bigfoot, and he was talking about this lady who contacted him, who she lived. I want to say it was either Alabama, Arkansas, one of these A states, and she lived. Her property basically bordered on this forest land, wooded land, and she had started calling out, doing what she thought was Bigfoot calls, out there, like when the sun went down, hoping the Bigfoot would show up. And I was like, do you really know what you're doing? I mean, do you really want? I mean, sometimes people, that thing about be careful what you wish for. Sometimes
Right.
people don't realize, like Bigfoot might not come and want to show up and have tea with you, you know, or anything. This he might eat your animals. He might eat your chickens because you were there, or he might think you might be putting out a mating call for all you know.
Right. Well, and I'm always dubious about there are lots of people who claim that there's Bigfoot on my property, and I leave food out for them, and they come and bring me presents. I got to call BS on all that because they'd have pictures.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Now, I don't believe that people should have pictures of Bigfoot because that's one thing the skeptics will say is everybody's got a camera on their phone nowadays.
Right.
If there was a Bigfoot out there, we'd have a picture of it, that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
blurry. No, you wouldn't, because if you were standing 10 yards away from a Bigfoot, that's the last thing you'd want to do is take their
Yes.
picture.
Yes.
But if somebody is claiming that they attract Bigfoots to their house on a regular basis, they could take a picture.
Sure. I'd say, and I say sometimes a lot of people that have these encounters really were not looking for it. It just happens, and they're not ready. In other words, it's not like they were out there looking for the moment. They just happened. Something happened. Either they see something in their car, on the road, and like you said, they're just dumbstruck. They're like, camera, phone, what? Are you kidding? I was just trying to like make it fit into my reality, and of course, the
I
moment
was
comes and goes.
I was realizing I couldn't outrun it.
Exactly. It's like, okay, this thing says. Anyway, Jason, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on tonight. You've been such a wonderful guest. And let me ask you, you have a book that just came out, which was the last one, the fiction one. Which was the last?
Right.
What?
Yeah. The last book that came out was a novel. It just came out in on the 21st of July.
Okay.
It's called So You Had to Build a Time Machine. It's a humorous science fiction book, and it's gotten quite a few good reviews.
That's great.
It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the places.
Okay. And let me ask you something for my podcast listeners. What is your website address or where they could find out more information about you and your books?
It is JasonOffutt.com. JasonOffutt.com.
Okay, there you go. And your books are also available on Amazon as well, right?
Correct.
Perfect. Again, thank you so much. You've been wonderful. I love talking to you. You have such great stories. I'm telling you. And like I said, folks, I
Thanks.
started reading those fiction books and I was laughing. I'm sorry, but you really really know as personally as far as I love the way you write. The humor you have when you write, it's just great. So I urge
I
people
appreciate
to.
that.
All right, take care and good luck to you on any of your new projects, okay?
All right, terrific. Thank you so much for having me back on the show.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. I'm telling you, I did. Because when I have a guest coming on, I like to look to see what they've been doing. And as a writer, I like to see what other people write. And I know, and I had seen his work before. And, of course, he has the nonfiction, which is like the cryptids, which is research. And then he has these other fictional books. And he is, let me tell you something, just he writes in such a way that you find yourself like laughing out loud, that people look at you and go, what's up with you? That you'll just sit there and laugh because his humor is great. He knows how to write, and that humor comes along. I love it. It's great, great humor. Um, but well written, by the way. Very well written. And you know what? This thing of the cryptid, like he said, he wrote it, you know, mostly based on research because a lot of these things were like a one time thing, or they were cited X amount of time, many, many, many years ago, and then maybe some local newspaper picked it up. And from what I found when I'm doing my own research, some of these newspapers, they would run a story in other parts of the country or in other parts of the state. If they were having a slow news day, they would reprint the article. So sometimes they got a little bit of exposure, and other times it just stayed in the local community, depending on what was going on in the rest of the country. If anybody else would pick it up. So there's some stories that is true. Um, the only way you're gonna ever find out about it is if you read. I mean, some of these stories are so old. There's no living witnesses or people that live there, and if they did, it was like they didn't witness it firsthand. They heard it from their grandparents who were around that time and remember when the so and so was terrorizing the neighborhood, whatever. Um, but uh, he makes a very good point that everybody a lot of times by its very description, when you throw a sighting of something into the cryptid, it's like everybody right there. It's like the mystery. And let me give you an example. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard, which by the way is accurate and truthful. You know how the bull shark has been found in brackish waters. It's traveled up tributaries that lead to rivers off the ocean. And at one point, it was thought that sharks, you could only find them in salt water, in the ocean, and that they wouldn't exist or purposely uh, go up a river where the water is, there's a confluence of, fresh water and salt water. And there have been sightings, and even attacked because bull sharks are known to be very aggressive, where they've killed human beings because people have been uh, playing or diving or in what they considered was a river or a pool, and lo and behold, they had a predator, like of all things, not only just a shark but a bull shark, which is aggressive, come and bite them or eat them or drag them under. So a lot of times, uh, and I'm using that as an example. If let's say there wouldn't have been any modern sightings to prove that that's accurate, as far as that a bull shark would come up and be found attacking people in a river. Most people would think, oh, and this was found to be accurate 100 years ago. People would say, oh, that a shark. No, they must have. They would come up with 100 million different types of fish that lived in that area. Maybe that one that grew, but there's no way it could be a shark, and much less have attacked or eaten somebody or killed them, and maybe the person just drowned. And come to find out, it is accurate. And I guess the point I'm saying is that sometimes a lot of these stories, people think that because it happened 100 years ago or 80 years ago, and maybe it was something that was seen by only a couple of people, or it occurred, or a sighting was only for X amount of time, that, yeah, because back then people would see things and they would just, doesn't mean that they weren't being accurate and truthful. You'd be surprised. A lot of these sightings, a lot of these cryptids had a significant amount of witnesses. And by the way, a lot of these witnesses were very credible witnesses. These would be people that would be the first, if they lived presently, who would be like, no, that's, in other words, for them to actually be quoted as saying, I saw it, or have their own first-hand experience, was, in other words, because, as a matter of fact, what you find in a lot of these instances is that when something like this happens, unless it was a one-time thing and that was it, they would call in the leaders, the priest, the clergy, the mayor, all these important people they would call in, like, you need to see this, and by the way, you need to solve this, whatever it is that we're seeing, or whatever is causing this disturbance. And these were the first people that would be saying, yes, I saw this. They would be vouching for the people, saying, if they didn't have themselves the experience, they would vouch for the credibility of this other person as far as what they described. And sometimes these things occurred more than once, and then maybe for a couple of months, and then they disappeared. And some people say, well, either the witness was lying, or they were exaggerating, or the newspaper wanted to sensationalize it, and they took this little story and they ran with it, but you know what, depending on the story, because like I said, I've done research sometimes, and sometimes you would see the same story written by different writers, and they you could tell by the tone of it that they were reporting on something that it was being described to them as being accurate. Because I've read some pieces of some of these older newspapers that you could tell it's very tongue-in-cheek, where they kind of like, yeah, and they saw this, yeah, sure, and yeah. And then there's other ones that you could tell that they are describing, they're retelling what witnesses say they saw or experienced. And by the way, which were, what you consider true journalists, they don't add or detract from the story. They just report on what they're being told. And again, a lot of times we kind of want to think that because something happened so many years ago, before people had technology like we do, it's like, lack of technology is equivalent to being stupid. Really? What does that have to do with anything? Same thing as what Jason was talking about, some of these stories about some of these creatures predate that even the natives that lived in that area were describing encounters, or we know that this type of cryptid, whatever it was, existed, whether it was a lake monster or a Bigfoot or whatever the case might be. And people discounted it, thinking, it's just myths, fables, blah, blah. Sure. Why? Because, of course, everybody equates to, we're so technologically advanced now, we're so smart, and we are the best observers in the world, and we're the only ones that know when something is true, and scientifically we're on the up and up. Really? I think that a lot of times, don't get me wrong, I can see where, yeah, at some point you have to vet certain stories, but I think a lot of times things have been discounted based on that, because some people want to say that modern, as in modern times, we're superior observers or superior judges of what's true, and that we're not going to fall for that, that made up fairy tale. And I think a lot of times it bites us in the rear end big time. Even though then I think sometimes they keep it down low. And and I think I'm not going to say every cryptid has existed. You might have a cryptid that maybe was on the brink of extinction to begin with. Maybe when it was seen X amount of years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whenever it was sighted, let's say, maybe it was already on the roadway to extinction. And when it was seen, maybe that was maybe one of the last few that were left, and then they died out. And then, of course, people say, well, you know what? They was never seen again. You don't know. But let's face it, a lot of species die out because they just fail to adapt, or the key to which is not survival of the fittest, it's survival of he who reproduces the most. If you they have found, like, in a lot of these fossil records, when they would have different versions of, let's say, a certain animal, but you would have this one develop this way. In other words, they all know that these different animals sprung from this one animal originally, and then they all kind of did their little offshoot, and they developed certain ways. And usually the ones that made it were the ones that developed certain things, even if it was a special tooth, to adapt in order for them to eat, for example. In other words, adaptability is very important, but also the ability to procreate. All right? In other words, survival is, because you can be very suited to your environment, but if you don't procreate, that's it. You're going to die out. And by that they mean as in you have enough young where you're gonna lose some to disease, accident, and that you're gonna reproduce enough to still have another generation that will survive you, and then they procreate, and so on and so on and so on. That's one of the problems sometimes where species become extinct, is lack of adaptability or lack of mates, to go ahead and procreate more. In other words, you could be this very well adapted animal, but if you don't find a suitable mate, and let's face it, animals are like humans. They only have a window of time that they can reproduce. Okay, so females, either too young or too old, that they can take care of their young. There's a lot of different things, as far as in the animal kingdom. You have animals that survive in pods or prides, like lions or killer whales, and you have other animals that basically the mother is off by themselves and they have their young. But if they don't find that male somewhere in the time that they're going to heat, guess what? That's it. That window of time for them to procreate is gone. Because some of these animals only go into, when I say heat, as far as being able to be impregnated, only a certain window of time. It's not like they walk around year round looking for a mate. So in other words, unless they have that meeting between male and female, then that's it. So that's why also a lot of these species disappear. My point being, let's go back to the cryptid, that there might have been cryptids out there that were sighted for a while and then never seen again, and people just dismiss it as people's over imagination, and why didn't we see them, and maybe really weird stuff. That must be interesting. His book has 250 stories of different cryptids. That might be the answer why some things were seen only for a short amount of time and never seen again, or why we have some cryptids even now that the sightings are very rare, because maybe their numbers are very because some people think, what are some of these cryptids? They just live a long time. There's not a lot of them, okay, but they live a really long time as in comparison to human beings. So yeah, there's some of them around. They're not running around all over the place, and that's why you have very rare sightings of them every once in a while. And there's and yeah, every once in a while they'll get together and maybe they'll mate and they'll produce one, but their reproduction cycle, maybe they reproduce very, very slowly. And that's fine. They survive somehow or other. Every once in a while somebody gets together, they have one. That's that. Maybe if a lot of years go by, um, same thing happens. There's or same thing as humans. Sometimes you're young, take a really long time to reach maturity. And you do have some species that will not have another offspring until the existing one reaches a certain age. And maybe in some cases, if this is just me making it up as I go along because we're talking about cryptids. Why not? What if this animal or primate or thing or human, well, whatever it is, has a really long life, and it takes a really long time for their young to reach a certain maturity where it will go and seek out to get impregnated again and have another offspring. Years and years and years. Because they have a very long lifespan. And what ends up happening is that, yeah, there's some of them around, but they're very few in numbers. Why not? I don't see it as something impossible. I think, just like what I commented to Jason, that despite what a lot of people think, the age of exploration is far from over. All right, and I love that book that he said about. As a matter of fact, I'm sure you saw the cover of it. That about things being in your own backyard, and by that what he meant was when he looked at things that were happening or sightings within 100-mile radius. And I do believe, contrary to what a lot of people think, that you have to go up to some exotic place or the one place where everybody sees everything just to have that experience. You'd be surprised if you do a little bit of research what you find very, very, very close to home. So on that note, guys, thank you for being part of my audience. Please make sure to look at my books on Amazon at under my author page, Marlene Pardo Pellicer. Right about now, I'm about to release my 5th fiction book, which is called The Dead Cast No Shadow, a Sybil novella number 2. You're all gonna. This is like a supernatural thriller, urban fantasy. I don't know what genre to place it in. Way out there, the weird section. So if you're into weird fiction, by all means, look it up. I think you're gonna really enjoy it. And I do have a free book on Smashwords called "I've Come for My Girl." There's a free version of it. It's 3 short stories that I wrote up that you can get for free if you go to Smashwords. It's like I said, you can download that for free. And again, like always, I ask that if you have any weird stories, please send them to me. I would love to hear about them. And go ahead and retell them here on Stories of the Supernatural, one of my other 2 channels, which are Nightshade Diary, which is your classic ghost story channel, and Supernatural Storytime, which is when I talk about or retell stories that are sent to me, experiences that others have had. And again, if you want to remain anonymous, I'll do that for you. Like names have been changed to protect the innocent. I can do that. Whatever it is, first-hand experience, second-hand experience, folklore that you've lived in, family tradition, whatever the case might be, I would love to hear a story. Just send it to me at marlene@miamighostchronicles.com, or you can go to miamighostchronicles.com. There's a tab on that website where you can submit the story at. And also, if you want to, I would love to have you. I would love to interview you on the show. If you're up to that, I would love to do that as well. Again, guys, thank you for being part of my audience and coming back every week. Take care.